Welcome to the Legal Growth Table. I'm Andrew Hutchinson.
And I am Barbara Koenen-Geering.
And together, we are your hosts. Every 2 weeks, we sit down with the people who are actually doing the work of growing law firms from the inside. The ones who know where the real conversations happen, and more importantly, where they don't.
Because everyone in this industry talks about growth. Very few talk honestly about how it actually happens. The politics, the resistance, the things that didn't go to plan. That's what this table is for. So let's get into it.
Welcome back to the Legal Growth Table. I am delighted today to have Chandler with us and, of course, Barbara, my ever faithful host. Chandler, thank you so much for joining us. Maybe for the audience, you could introduce yourself, give us a little bit of a background on you and the firm that you work for and the role that you do today.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Barbara. Chandler Lauzon. I am the Chief Growth Officer at Cassels, which is a national Canadian law firm of about 400 lawyers, offices coast to coast across Canada. I refer to myself lovingly as a recovering lawyer. I practiced law both in the private practice context and the in-house context at an earlier stage in my career for about 8 years, and woke up one day and realized this practicing law thing isn't for me, and made the pivot at that time to another national law firm to write proposals, which has been honestly probably the best grounding I could have had to navigate the career that I have had since. And this was, we're talking sort of early 2000s here. And so this was the very early days of alternative career paths, if you will, and a lot of questions about why would you do that? Why are you taking the off ramp and all that? And so really interesting to sort of see the evolution and development of these careers, both for former lawyers, but also for business development and marketing professionals across the board. And it's really interesting to watch where firms are at today as I look back now as a guy with a bit of gray hair at the evolution of these functions over, call it 20 years, 25 years inside law firms. It's actually really invigorating and energizing to see the kinds of things that we're doing, the kinds of things we're thinking about, and the roles that professionals can play in elevating these businesses.
Well, it's really interesting you say that. Barbara and myself have run roundtables in parts of Europe where it is what it was 20 years ago here in North America.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing to see when you compare and contrast the difference from firms who just have no concept of what marketing and business development is and how you use it. And then you think about those advancements over that period of time that you're talking about. It is quite staggering, but I think also the acceleration that we see, at the moment is amazing. If you were to look at that sort of starting out, in proposals and the development up to today, what were some of the key takeaways for you? Obviously, you talk about that grounding in
Mm-hmm.
proposals, which I think is really interesting. But tell us a little bit about that journey for you and some of the things that you learned on the way that got you to where you are today.
Yeah, I think one of the things that served me pretty well, I came out doing that proposal work at a pretty interesting time. Was in the midst of that, call it 2006, 2007, global recession, right? And we were starting to have a lot of conversations about value. We were starting to have a lot of conversations about price. We were starting to have a lot of conversations about, efficient service delivery and the leverage of, in those days, a little more early stage technology for the delivery of legal services. And so, you're right in the mix of all that. When you're writing proposals, you're having these conversations with lawyers. And I think for me, and the thing I try to impart to my team members now as a leader, that the light bulb went on for me when I realized I'm the guy cranking out 100 of these things a year. And each of the individual partners might touch 2 or 3 at best. So I'm the expert. I know more than anybody in this place about what a proposal is and how to win client work and what clients are looking for and how to have those conversations and how to price it and how to talk about value and how to talk about service. And that was a real, sort of call it high watermark moment for me in terms of my own learning and going, okay, this is how I position myself inside this firm. I've got to stick my neck out a little bit and be perceived as the expert, and leverage and trade on a bit of that capital that I have now earned and that respect that I've now earned inside this firm. And I say it to all my guys now, and anywhere I've been, is like, behave like the experts that you are. They come to you for insight, for recommendations. Yes, sometimes we get bogged down in the minutia of, please deliver this thing for me, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. But the way to elevate yourself and the way to build respect and to build credibility in the firm is to take some of those calculated risks and say, hey, I probably know more about this than most of you folks, so can I make a recommendation? Can I try and steer you in the right direction? Can we have this conversation? Is it served me well, and that's what I'm now trying to impart to my team.
Do you think that's sort of like easier for you because you've been on the other side? Like before you moved to, let's call it the dark side, you were a practicing lawyer and then you
Yeah.
joined on sort of like the marketing and BD side of things. Was that transition, maybe there's two parts to this question. It's like, was that transition um, easy for you in terms
Yeah.
of moving, the way that you were seen within the firm, for example, and
Mhm.
your role itself? But also, was it easier for you to then position yourself as the expert in that field, or was it more difficult because you had a different background?
I think listen, I'm well aware when I walk into a room and people know that I've got the legal degree, that affords me a degree of privilege and
Yeah,
credibility in the room. Certainly, I speak
yeah,
the language, and I know
yeah,
enough to be dangerous about what all of these folks do all day.
exactly.
But I think for those who have not necessarily gone to law school, um, you know, you don't need it, right? We are selling services to the business community. And so if you understand business, if you understand how clients think, if you understand how businesses operate, if you understand what's going on in the economy, what opportunities that are afforded to companies doing business in an economic, landscape, how people buy, how the emotional center of how people buy and make decisions about who they hire, you can get there. Like, yes, the legal degree gets me a little check mark sometimes in certain audiences, but I think what has served me best is a bit more lateral thinking about, okay, if I put myself in the shoes of that client, what are they thinking about? What does their
Yeah.
disclosure material tell me? What does their media stuff tell me? What are they going through in this economic climate that then informs what services we ought to be positioning in the marketplace? So I think if professionals can get there, it'll open a lot of the same sorts of doors.
How far do you think that goes? And I say that from the perspective of um, actually sitting in the room and having that conversation. And I had a really interesting conversation with somebody this week, and we were talking about they work in a law firm, they're a BD
Mhm.
person in a law firm, and we talked about discovery, so a very traditional sales term, right? And
Mhm.
I said, well, because we were talking about the future and what does that look like, and even rainmakers, do they really have the skills? And one of the points that this person made was that partners, even the best rainmakers, dive very quickly into the situation, the legal situation, what's
Mhm.
going on.
Mhm.
And this person very eloquently walked through 5 stages of what you would do if you were a professional salesperson, right? Doing discovery on this situation. It
Yeah.
isn't about the legal situation. It's about, to your point, the impact on the business. What does this mean today? Why are you coming to us? What does that mean for how you think about price and time and people and all of those sorts of things?
Yeah.
And so I guess my question to you is, building that knowledge, how do you then take that beyond just advice and guidance in the background to getting a seat at the table in those meetings?
Yeah, I mean it's a tricky question. I think it's going to be bespoke for every firm. I think it's going to be bespoke for every professional. I would say this. I would point to, maybe, Andrew, I'd pivot your question to some of the characteristics I have seen in professionals who have been able to navigate that journey.
Yeah.
I think certainly comfort with ambiguity, comfort with awkward silence. I have an interesting sort of observation about working with lawyers, is that when you get more than about 6 or 8 of them in a room, everybody goes quiet because there's safety in not saying anything, right?
Yeah.
There's a risk factor to be speaking up and sort of saying, yeah, I'll do this, or this is my observation, or I agree, or I disagree. And so you have to kind of take your swings multiple times And I would say the professionals that have had success and have found momentum in an ability to get that seat at the table and be those trusted advisors that we want to see inside of our firms
Yeah.
are resilient, are willing to accept that silence in the moment, but then go around the hall and sort of say, hey, can we have a follow-up conversation about this, and really move this needle forward? Can I count on you to action the thing that we talked about in that meeting, and I'll action the thing that I talked about in that meeting, and then we'll come back together in a week and see where we land. Um, it's very difficult to get things done in a large group setting, I would say.
Mm.
You have to be willing to walk the halls. I think folks who are recognize that you got to get out from behind your terminal,
Yeah.
and you've got to do BD, right? We got to take our
Yeah,
own medicine.
internally. Oh, I
Yeah,
couldn't agree more. Yeah, this is
yeah,
so
we got to
true.
do our own thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel, I mean, we have to practice what we preach as well, right?
Mhm.
So the lawyers in the firm are essentially our clients as a BD
Yes.
and marketing function at least.
Yeah.
And I think we have to also show this is how you do it, so then
Yeah.
they can do it too.
Yeah.
And we can't be just sat at the desk and just wait for people to do stuff. And
No.
I mean, everything you've just said, I recognize it. I've
Mhm.
seen it myself multiple times at any firm I've worked at, really. I think it's
Yeah.
the same everywhere, is what we
Yeah.
can conclude here.
Yeah.
And it would be, yeah, I think it would be a huge sort of like a mission if you weren't able to work that room and if you weren't able to figure out these points that you said, okay, you have to speak with people individually.
Yeah.
And I hear a lot of sort of like, yeah, frustration, I would say, and some complaining about, lawyers are difficult to work with and it's so challenging.
Mhm.
But this is the climate, this is the environment, so you have to make it work, right? And I think what you said really resonates with me at least, and I'm sure also with the audience. But now, Chandler,
Mhm.
you have become Chief Growth Officer at your firm. I'd love to hear what does that mean? And in Andrew's first question around your journey from a practicing lawyer to working mostly in sort of like a bids proposal function to now fast forward being the Chief Growth Officer. And we see more of these titles now come up, and I think different firms shape the role in different ways. But I'd really be keen to know, what does that mean for you, and how does that tie back to the journey that you've had in your career?
I think, well, the mission here at this firm was an interesting one, and it's what appealed to me. I think, like a lot of firms, and Andrew, you sort of touched on this earlier in the conversation. Like a lot of firms, this one had a BD and marketing function that was responsive, but tactical, right? And again, I go back to that analogy, and I said it to my partners just the other day at a meeting. We were a team where if you asked for a thing, this department delivered a thing without a whole lot of insight into, was this the right thing, is this strategic, is this connected to the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And so the mission here was, and this is a refrain a lot of firms I think are going through right now, we want this to be more strategic. Okay, great, let's talk about what that means, and let's talk
Yeah.
about what it doesn't mean. um, and how do we move the needle from the sort of let's serve up a thing all day long, um, to making some decisions about what are the right things? Where should we be spending our time? Where should we be spending our money? And what is really going to drive growth? And where should we be driving growth? One of the things we're going through right now and working with the finance function is, lots of great reporting on, backwards looking indicators, right? But then taking that information and talking to management and talking to partners and talking about, you know, within group settings, where do we want to be earning money in the next few years? What do the numbers tell us about our margin? What do the numbers tell us about where we should be deploying resources, where we should be staffing up? And we're all going through, this journey of the pyramid kind of inverting, right? The advent of AI, and what do we, how many associates do we need going forward, right? We're all in that sort of journey right now. Well, let's have that conversation through the lens of where we want to steer the business, right? Where are we going to make money 5 years from now? And I think we're all struggling with that in some form or fashion. Um, I look at developments in the US, particularly in the UK to some extent, around how top firms are organizing their practice. And so
Yeah.
being part of those conversations is really what I think, the growth mandate is. And then how that trickles down to my team. I've done, over the first 3 months here, a bit of a build out in the business development function. We're gonna refresh how we do business development planning around here, and it's all going to be through the lens of what's going to drive revenue growth, what's going to increase profitability, and perhaps to a lesser extent, but equally important, what's going to build profile. Those are the three metrics right now, and I don't want a whole lot of noise outside of that, right? It's got to link back to revenue generation, profitability, profile, and it's got to be tangible. And it can't just be guesswork. Like I want to see this driven by data. I want to see this driven by real information, real meaningful information from our partners about where our opportunities lie. And then I want to reward accountability. That's the dirty word right now. It used to be
Yes.
sales was the dirty word. Now accountability is the dirty word. And I want to reward behaviors from partners, from associates, from my team members that demonstrate accountability. I'm going to do a thing to move the ball down the field, to deepen this relationship, to expand this existing client, to land this new prospect. Um, Great, check mark. You do that, I will go to bat for you. I will make sure you are resourced appropriately. I will make sure you have budget. I will speak to management and say this individual is doing what they said they were going to do. So let's get behind them. So that's I'm sort of going a little different directions here, but that's what growth means to me as we are on this journey of what used to be perhaps a more tactical function to a more strategic function.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you say it's essentially looking at it more proactively rather than reactively. And the points that you made around looking at historic data, but rather tap into, can we do some predictive analysis and see where we actually want to be in the future? I
Yeah.
think there is a massive shift from many firms that is currently going on. And I'm really pleased to see that your firm has given this the thought and attention that it really deserves, because they are right. It is a role on its own
Mhm.
to be able to do that and to have that mandate.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think, the most progressive firms are getting behind that sort of notion that this business isn't going to look the same 3, 4, 5 years from now. It's funny. I think my sweet spot a lot of times is sort of the 35 to 45-year-old crowd within the firm. Those new and up and coming partners in a lot of cases, and more than any other generation, I would say those folks now have this inherent understanding that the kind of business they are going to inherit is not going to look like the business that ran for the last 100 years. It's just going to be different. And there's, some are excited about that, some see that as a challenge, and some are anxious about it. And so, kind of my job and my team's job is to help guide them through that.
The what you described sounds fantastic, right? That's Elysium, right? That's what we want to see. But the question, I guess, is how do you start to get there? And so my question to you would be, did did the firm prior to your arrival have a structured approach to how it built strategy and business plans and those sorts of things? And if it did or didn't, how has that transition been in terms of getting people to start thinking in a more structured way from a data
Mhm.
perspective into how you build those plans? Because sometimes that's the hardest thing, right? We all talk about cultural change. It doesn't matter whether that's related to a service that we offer, a business process or technology, that invariably is the hardest part in law firms. So
Mhm.
maybe talk a little bit about that journey of getting to a place where you can actually have a plan that you can be accountable to.
I think that a lot of the ingredients were starting to take shape here. This firm has done the business planning thing, had a process, had some templates and processes in place to try and advance that. But I think like a lot of firms, and I've seen this play out at various stops. A couple of things happen. Number one, you lose momentum because that accountability is not baked in, right? Number two, the plan starts nice and crisp and tight, and then this happens, right? And when this happens, that accountability fades away because people can kind of hide in well, we've got 35 action items and none of them are really getting done, and so that's okay. And then you lose all that momentum, you lose all that excitement. And so part of this refresh for me and speaking with my BD professionals as we relaunch this, business intentional business planning approach is we got to keep we are the guardrails. We've got to
Yeah.
keep this thing lean and manageable, and let's get momentum by doing three things really well. And then let's move on to the next three things. Lists of 20 in law firms will never get done. They will sit in a desk drawer and they will never get done. So
Yeah.
that's sort of a guiding principle for me. The other thing that's been, a really nice surprise, if you will, at this firm, a lot of the other complementary infrastructure is in a really good state. One of the things that is absolutely essential to these roles is you need to have relationships, not only with the partners, but with your peers in information technology, with your peers in innovation and KM, with your peers in finance, with your peers in professional resources and professional development. You have to build those bridges, and you are reliant in large part on the maturity and sophistication of their programs and their service delivery to be able to enable your job. And I have been pleasantly surprised, in fact, delighted to find that my peer groups within this firm are well underway on infrastructure, strategic planning, resourcing and staffing, effectively and in a way that reflects the strategic plan, focus rigorously on the projects that are actually going to move the needle. And so you can't do it alone, right? You need those folks, and you need that peer group, and you need that peer group's resources to all be kind of pulling in the same direction. And that's been a nice development here.
Yeah, that's great to hear, and that's what we see is sometimes the real blockers. It's silly if you talk about it, because we've had examples where those functions weren't aligned, and for example, a information technology director would be blocking certain, opportunities or technology advancements because they were adamant they needed to work in a particular way, where the commercial function of the business could literally not function because they couldn't get hold on the right data or use the right technology for them to be able to do the stuff that should be done, to be more proactive and also strategic. And I think it's massively important. And even for larger scale projects that may not even have to do with any of these people directly, but to get them involved and to get the buy-in and for them to be able to support you on that journey as well, I think is incredibly powerful, and sometimes something that is really missed within firms.
I think when you have a set of a C-suite leaders, let's call it, but also
Yeah.
the folks in the teams, if they are aligned around the notion that at some fundamental level we're all doing business development,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
We're just at different points on the pipeline, and some of it might be service delivery, client success type stuff, right? I think about the tools and tasks that the IT group undertakes, right, to enable more efficient service delivery. That's client success stuff, but that's still pipeline work, right? And so if there is that alignment from the top down that we are all here to drive sales, engaging client relationships, great service delivery, client satisfaction, then you can unlock a lot of really cool stuff. If everyone's kind of got their elbows up in a fiefdom of like, well, I'm showing value in a different way, it's going to be tricky. So I've been really, really pleased at this firm that we are all on the same page.
Well, I
Yeah.
think it's important. You touched on the use of data, right? And I talk to people all the time who are trying to wrap their arms around how do we start to use data, and that
Mhm.
isn't just internal, that's external, and how do we bring that together and then use that in the way that you've described. How have you found that journey? Because, sometimes you step into a role, and I have friends who've done it recently, and they're like, oh my gosh, I kind of knew it was bad, but I didn't realize just how bad it was. Um, what's your experience of that been? And obviously AI is floating around,
Yeah.
and so that can be helpful. But how have you started to get the data that you need in the right place to be able to enable the things you want to do?
Yeah, I mean, it's a journey for sure, and every
Yeah.
firm that I've been at, it's so funny, when you move around a little bit, if you plot all these firms kind of on a bar graph, everybody's
Yeah.
kind of here, 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 and some people are ahead on some things and behind on others, right? So part of the job when you land in a new place like this is kind of assessing where we are on the bar graph. And I think for this firm that I am at, the journey is this one. It is the collation of data from disparate sources to tell
Yeah.
the story, right? And I think a
Yeah.
lot of firms are on this, right? We have grown up, and I've been doing this long enough. Um, you know, BD had its stuff, and finance had its stuff, and
Exactly.
KM had its stuff, and the silos never touched one another, right? And now we're all on this journey of like whether it's via CRM tools, whether it's via data lake tools, whether it's via AI, we're all trying to harmonize these disparate sources of data and information within the firm to then tell this more comprehensive story about the health of our business, about the nature of our client relationships, about our opportunities. And so, the magic in trying to put all that together is probably the biggest challenge right now at this firm, and really in a lot of Canadian firms. I think that's probably a similar
I
story.
think I would say globally. We've spoken to so many
Yeah,
recently, and this seems to
yeah,
be like, yeah, a key
yeah,
issue. You're right.
yeah. It's but again, if you have a willing team who's like, okay, let's chip away at this. Like it does seem like a big beast, right? When you sit back and look
Mm.
at it from 30,000 feet and you go, oh, we got to talk about taxonomies again because nothing matches up. Okay, great. Let's start small. Let's start with this list
Yeah.
first. Okay, great. Let's start with this report. What do we want this report to look like? What do we want the output to be? Layering on to that, I think for my team, I've asked them, keep your ears open for the kinds of outputs you want, that your partners want, right? Hey,
Mm.
the use cases here are, I wish I had this piece of information. I wish we had this report. I wish I had this piece of insight. I need that fed back to our colleagues, to myself, to our colleagues within the firm to say, okay, this is what I'm hearing from our partners who are, at the end of the day, our sales team, right?
Yeah.
And my salespeople need this piece of information to do their jobs well. Okay, let's go build that, right? But let's chip away at it. Like I think there's a danger in falling into the trap of oh my God, we'll never get this done because it's just so big. Yeah,
Mm.
it's big, but got to start climbing the mountain at the bottom, I guess. So let's chip away at it.
Yeah.
Well, I think
It's
oh, sorry.
sorry, so interesting. I'll let you talk, Andrew, about this, but there's many things I think we could say about it because it's fascinating. Because this is a struggle for most firms, and there doesn't seem to be like one easy solution. I think it's really a journey. One of the questions I had, if we have time to address it, was also around firms now being in more of a position favorable to experimenting with stuff like around, create projects around that data. How do we use data? How are we going to analyze it? What do we actually need it for? Who needs to be
Mm-hmm.
involved, etc. But also try to build things. I mean, you can build so many things through vibe coding and try to see
Mm-hmm.
like smaller experiments within what it is that you need it for.
Yeah,
Try it out and then maybe build it and make it bigger, so that
yeah,
it works for your firm exactly. Is that something that you see already happening?
I do. And again, I don't want to be ageist about this, but again, I look at the generation that's coming up in the young partnership, and I think about my wife's in education. And so I'm coming around full circle on this story in just a second, but I think about how people of a certain generation learned, right? I'm an older guy, I'm 50 plus. We all sat in rows and we were individual contributors within our classroom, right?
Yep.
Younger people sat in groups of six. They did group work. They tried some stuff. They were told making mistakes is okay. That's how you learn, right? And I think the future leadership of law firms, I hope the future leadership of law firms, and even the present leadership of law firms, is coming around to that notion that making some mistakes is okay. It is very counterintuitive to how we are trained as legal professionals, right? You got to get it right on the first try, and that memo's got to be bang on, and also, don't screw it up. And it's just rewiring the brain a little bit, and it's rewiring, or at least taking the notion that management of this law firm as a business is different than the discipline of delivering legal services to clients,
Yes.
right? And once we get our heads around that, the management of the business maybe can't afford to take some risks, can't afford to make some mistakes, can't afford to try some stuff to see what happens. And I think, current and future leadership of law firms, I'm encouraged, I'm optimistic that they will get to that alignment, and that will enable folks in my role, folks on my team, folks in other roles to really try some neat stuff, and the light bulb will come on when we hit the jackpot on some of these insights.
I'm aware that we're coming up on time, and Barbara's going to cut us off because
I'll
that
be
that
gentle
that's
this
her
time. We've got
role.
some time.
um, and we could talk about the data piece for forever. But I think that the point that maybe we could finish on, this this segment of sort of the business of laws or the marketing and business development teams is changing so quickly now. a function of competition, a function of what does the future look like, and I think a greater need to actually use that dirty word that's called selling.
Mhm.
And I'd love to get your perspective. Like, what if you roll forwards even 3 years? What do you think that? How do you think marketing and business development is going to evolve in our community?
I think I think on the BD sales side, I think in Canada, we're not there yet. I've seen it in some corners. Whether or not we get to a point that BD professionals are, call it client facing,
Mm.
right? Actually starting conversations with clients, not only about kind of post matter, client listening, feedback kinds of conversations, but front ended conversations. What are you dealing with? What's keeping you up at night? What are the opportunities here? What is your business going through? I don't think we're quite there yet, but I could see it in the next sort of 3, 5, 8, where there are embedded, call it sales professionals, and client relations professionals in departments like this. And I think I'd welcome it. Like, I think about the opportunities in the Canadian market. We're a resource-based economy primarily. We are an economy where private capital is particularly invested. These are industry spaces. These are industry spaces that require specialized knowledge, and in many cases require specialized networks, right? And so I can see a future where firms start to say maybe the investment in professionals who maybe don't practice, right, are not going to actually deliver the service at the end of the day, but are here to open doors, are here to start conversations, are here to make introductions, connect dots, leverage their networks, and be part of the sales cycle in a more meaningful and tangible front-ended way, is a development I wouldn't be surprised to see in the not too distant future. Um, and on the sort of Marcom side of things, I would say, we are finite resources, so we got to be really intentional and razor sharp about content strategy, event strategy, client engagement strategy. We have to sort of move past the all things to all people, as I say, need a thing, we deliver a thing mentality. I have to start asking really critical questions about, is this the best use of resources? Is this the best way in which we want to present and position our brand? Does it accord to strategy, yes or no? And if it's no, sorry, we're going to have to pivot this in a different direction. And if it's yes, okay, we're going to staff this up and resource it effectively.
Well, I think on that point, it's easier to say no when you have a plan. And I think, a lot of your peers wrestle with the same problem, right? Which is just constantly bombarded with things that they're being asked to do.
Yeah.
And it's hard to say no if you can't turn back to the plan that you all mutually agreed at the beginning of the year or the beginning of the half or whatever it
Yeah.
may be, and say, this doesn't align with this. And so unless you can give me a good justification for an exception as to why
Yeah.
we should do it, right, we're going to focus on other areas.
Yeah.
Um,
The
Less
plan
is
and the
more.
data, the plan and the data, right?
Data,
The
Yeah.
yeah,
ability to
the
point to
facts are.
numbers and say, this doesn't make sense because the numbers tell me it doesn't make sense.
Yes.
And we're all in a various states of evolution on that, but I think that is, once we crack that nut, that will enable more of those critical conversations.
I agree.
Absolutely agree. Well, there is a million other things that I would like to ask you, but we keep these conversations deliberately short. Also, hoping that we might be able to do a part two with you at some point because there is just too much to unpack. But I've learned loads, and thank you so much for sharing so openly. We really do appreciate it. We wish you all the best in your relatively still new role, and I'm sure that there is so much to be done. It's going to be a really interesting time. So it will definitely be good to check in again after 6 months and see where you're at, what you're up to. That would be really, really exciting. Thank you also, Andrew. As always, it was great to have this chat. Many ideas come to the surface, so I'm sure we will continue to talk about this. Thank you, Chandler, for taking the time and speak with us and our audience. Thank you very much for listening, for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
If this conversation resonated with you, share it with someone in your firm who needs to hear it.
You can find us on Spotify and YouTube, and follow along on LinkedIn, where we keep the conversation going between episodes.
We'll see you in 2 weeks.